Alrighty, I am so excited today. Today is a very special day on the podcast because we are bringing in somebody who has an extensive career in the fundraising space, who has done that on the customer side and has just a journey that I want to share with everyone out there who's listening in today. So, Steve, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be on Tide Talks today.
Of course, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. We typically will start off with a fun question around music. It's something that I love to talk about, and really thinking about a famous band or a song that resonates with you. Anything come to mind, high level from your career?
Well, this is an embarrassing story to get started with, but I actually don't like music. I've had very little exposure to it throughout my life. I grew up listening to AM talk radio. In fact, my friends know that freshman year of college, I was exposed as not knowing who the Rolling Stones or the Beatles were. So I feel a little bit insecure about it, but I've come to embrace it. But I actually don't enjoy music all that much. Have you
Interesting.
ever gotten that answer before?
I have
No.
never got that answer. You
Right.
kind of put me on the spot here, which is say, I guess I'll pivot and say, was there a particular AM station? Were you listening to like an NPR, or what kind of things were influential from that standpoint then?
Yeah. So I grew up outside of Cleveland, Ohio, as a rabid, diehard Pittsburgh fan, and so I would listen to baseball games on KDKA 1020 AM radio, and I would listen to it in my dad's boat of a car with the key turned backwards. So when they played West Coast games, he would often have to come out and wake me up in the car or carry me inside still asleep with the car battery dead, and usually the Pirates losing to the Dodgers, the Padres, or the Giants, some West Coast team.
Man, well, I love that. What a story. And look, we all have our journeys, our things that inspire us, or fun things from our youth, but kind of probably fun for your father and going out there, grabbing you out of the car and bringing you back in after listening to a late night ball game. Have sports always been a part of your past as well? Has that been something that's been?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a large part of my identity growing up was as a Pittsburgh fan. My mom and dad grew up as next door neighbors on the south side of Pittsburgh, not very well off families, and they met and had three kids very young in life, but they both had five brothers and sisters. So I have a lot of uncles and aunts who are Yinzers from Youngstown through the hills of West Virginia, and we always found a way to connect through Pittsburgh sports.
Awesome. What a fun little
Yeah,
entry into your
yeah.
journey. And one of the things I was curious about is obviously you've been in the philanthropy space for many, many years now. Was that something that started in your youth, or how did you kind of get your first entry into philanthropy, giving back, fundraising in
Well,
general?
so my first job as a fundraiser was freshman year in college. I got a job as a door-to-door canvasser, really to pay my way through school. I had no idea what I was getting into when I accepted the job, and you quickly learn it's a brutal one. You needed to make $150 a night, or you were fired. Well, actually, it was $750 per week, so it's a lot of turnover. And if you stick at it, you get promoted to be the director pretty quickly. And by the end of my first summer on the job, they would throw me the keys to a 14-person Dodge Ram van and say, "You handle Bethesda this month." And so that's how I got started learning how to do door to door canvassing as a fundraiser.
Oh my gosh, I love those first careers, especially in university. For me, it was important because I put myself through university by also having a job working in student success. And it's fun. I think it's really important to
Yeah.
get, one of the things that I was doing was working for the head fiscal officer. So I was going around to each campus department, getting all of their printed off Excel spreadsheets of their payroll and all of their expenses. But I think it's so important to get experience during that time, especially maybe more grueling positions that kind of challenge you in the way that you've just talked about, because I think those are great entry points in really starting to understand just the levels of where you can go in your career. And to your perspective, your point there, I started out as a very grueling position. Doesn't take a long time if you really get in there and own it to kind of move up. And so I think I always love stories where people talk about working themselves through college or university and building those skills early on, kind of pre-internship.
Yeah, I completely agree. It taught me three things right off the bat as an 18-year-old that I remember to this day and that I've used in every job that I've had. Um, the first one, look, is it helps to talk in problem solution strategy ask format. So the basic script at the door is to explain to people this is a problem. Do you agree? And most people would say yes, that's a problem. You'd say, well, the solution's really simple. Do you agree with the solution? And they would say, yes, that makes sense. You would explain a little bit longer. This is my strategy or the organization strategy of how we're going about it. And when someone shakes their head to that, and then you make a fundraising ask, it's really hard to say no after you've just agreed. That's a problem I care about. That's a solution that makes sense. That's a strategy that will work. Of course, I should give if I believe in those things. So that was the first thing. It helped me right off of the bat. The second one is that when you're a canvasser, you spend a lot more time in the office practicing and getting feedback than people realize. We would spend almost an hour and a half every day practicing our script, our rap on each other. And in real time, everyone who heard you practice would tell you three things you did well and three things you should be aware of that were not so good, that maybe you could either practice to make better or mitigate your way around it. And so
Mhm.
the culture of getting real time feedback. And the third one is the power of data visualization. I wasn't a
Interesting.
statistician, but people would come back to the van at night and say, "Oh, I missed quota because this is too poor of a neighborhood, or too rich of a neighborhood, or there was a vacuum scam artist, in this neighborhood last week." And so it became important to show people that their anecdotal observation was
Mhm.
sometimes different than what the data would show. You would ask
Yeah.
people, did you knock on 80 doors? Were 40 people home? Did you start your script 20 times? Did you make an ask 10 times and get five donations? And if the answer was no to anything in that data stream, then they would know where to focus their effort practicing the next
Mm.
day because each step in that funnel told them maybe where they were needing further education and practice.
There's a lot to unpack there. I think
I
I
just got
mean,
all that by freshman year of college, right?
freshman year of college, right? That's not even through your lived experience yet. So that's pretty impactful. I'm just trying to digest and think about one of the things I really like that you talked about was practicing too, right? And practicing with intention and finding what are the three things you did well, the three things you didn't do well. I think those are really critical pieces. Data visualization, that was not the one that I expected you to say in terms of visualizing that journey. Is that kind of what you were talking about and figuring out where we're not hitting
Yeah.
certain points and removing the, like you said, the anecdotal and trying to come in with something very specific to work on?
Yeah, to be honest, I came up with that by accident too. I would ask people on a whim to keep track with a little tick sheet on the back of their clipboard to just write down how many. And when we started it, I had no idea what the formula was supposed to be. But there was a pattern recognition. And at a certain point in leadership, right, you have to get good at pattern recognition. And so that was the first indication. But, honestly, it's been 30 some odd years since. And even though capabilities and statistics and data analytics have gotten so much better, if someone doesn't see something that they can change in their behavior as a result of looking at data, then why bother looking at it to begin with? So for me, the visualization was the unlock for people to say, I didn't know that. Now I did. I understand how it's causing a problem. And this is what I can do differently to maybe adjust it when I do this again tomorrow.
I'm such a visual person, so that also very much
Me too.
resonates, right?
Yeah.
In thinking to see,
Yeah.
because it's one thing for me to step back and really audit my language, how I'm showing up, all the, the fundamentals in terms of how we're going about fundraising. But it's another to take a step back and really look at it almost objectively on paper and say, like, this is where the breakdown, because to me, that gives me almost like a point in time or something to go hone in and focus on. So I love the idea of bringing the visualization in to help our fundraisers get better. And again, this is first year in college you're learning this. So data visualization, hopefully from your perspective, has come a long way from that standpoint as
Yeah.
well.
Well, yeah, now we've got Tableau dashboards and Looker or Hex data sets, and you can you can overthink it, right? You really can start to get, well, what do they say? Paralysis by analysis. And so for me, it was keeping it in someone's actual day-to-day actions. The other thing about canvassing is it's Groundhog Day. You do the same job 4 hours a day, every day of the week. And so each day when you show up, the hope is that you're taking all of the lessons and practice from yesterday and bringing them into today. And a good data visualization can keep you focused on that as well.
Man, that's some gold there, I think, for some of our fundraising clients to think about, or fundraising prospects to think about what they could be bringing that in and developing that muscle, because it's something like you said that it's part of everyday life, right? And so it's a muscle you
Yeah,
keep cultivating and
yeah.
you keep getting better at. But we also have to, I think there's a line in the sand which you called out, which is there's a lot that goes into practicing, rehearsing, and data visualization, but it's also just getting out there, going through the motions. And I always think about being just like a little kid, right, who's trying to learn a bike. That beginner mindset is so valuable, I think, for fundraisers who are thinking about how do I get better and how do I continuously grow. When you're looking at somebody, do you evaluate their level of like curiosity or thought, that type of beginner mentality? Or how have you seen people really excel in these three things, in particular around growth as a
Wow.
fundraiser?
The answer is yes. One of my favorite ways to compliment a candidate who I've been asked to take a peek at during an interview process is on intellectual curiosity. Someone who is driven by a deeper desire to figure out what they don't know. That will make up for so many other shortcomings in experience and maybe even competence to a certain degree. If you are intellectually curious, it can drive you leaps and bounds above others because it's rare. It's rarer than I thought it was until you start to get a large sample size of people that you meet. On the flip side of that, if I'm ever in an interview and it's not going so well, and I feel that someone is lacking that, my favorite question to ask is, tell me about a time you've learned that you were wrong. And did you arrive at that understanding instantly, or did you slowly arrive at it over time?
Oh,
And usually there are people who can't answer the question because they haven't maybe had to realize that they were wrong in a deeply held belief before.
it's quite the open-ended question there, Steve, to just gauge one, their initial response, but just watch them go through the cycles of trying to pick out an example and what that looks like. So I think you get a lot from that one question too.
Yes, that's right.
Incredible. Look, I want to, now that we know and the audience knows a little bit more about you and have, kind of understand some of your past, what I want to do is zoom out and, if I can, get your insights on the industry as a whole. So let's focus on, we'll talk about fundraising, nonprofits right now. I'd
Sure.
really like to hone in on nonprofits. Good news is nonprofits are definitely not under attack from left, down, right, up, and center. We don't have a fundraising
Huh,
issue. We don't have a
huh.
capacity staff issue. So I don't know what we're going to get into today, but Steve, look, I think I'm a eternal, sometimes obnoxious optimist. And I find that there is still an opportunity for us to save the sector that is the fabric of community. I think nonprofits working together are what create community, and they're things that we need to protect for the next generations, because they're in places that you don't know until they're gone. And until they're gone, you don't even know what services or value that they're creating. I'm finding right now that while all of there's a lot of fear mongering on the internet around fundraising, around the nonprofit sector. I find with the great wealth transfer, there's an opportunity where donors want to be asked to do the most. They don't want to be asked to do the least. They want to be the heroes of the next generation. And I think one thing, it's hard, especially I come from the nonprofit world. I have this nonprofit, I have another one, I'm the chairman. And look, I think in today's day and age, people are seeing what's happening in our economy and our world, and I think there's um, a renewed vigor to support these organizations who do so much for people that we may never see. I may have a bit more of an optimistic view. I'm curious what your perspective is on the industry and the sector as a whole, as obviously there's a lot of challenging situations and scenarios in the advent of the AI revolution that are all compounding on our space right now. But curious what you see at a high level from the
Yeah.
sector, and if you see doom and gloom or you see opportunity.
I think I'm even more optimistic than you just outlined. I choose to focus on the tailwinds that have driven us to where we are today because I think they're only getting started. I mean, look, first, being a fundraiser is something really special because you have to see a problem that others choose to ignore. You have to be optimistic enough to think that other people will care about it. You have to be optimistic enough to know that you can ask strangers to part with one of the most important things in life, their own money, And you have to be optimistic enough to know that the money itself can help fix the problem. All four of those are seemingly rare, yet I see it every day. There are tens of thousands of people who either chose the fundraising profession or ended up in it through some weird twist of luck. But to see a problem, to think others will care, to have the confidence to ask strangers, and then to believe that if they are generous enough to give, that it can make a difference is it's really beautiful. It's a noble job, and this country has a rich history of people being generous, of wanting to help. Uh, Not to get too like, as I mean, de Tocqueville, right? Spent years traveling the country hundreds of years ago and said he couldn't understand why Americans had this overwhelming desire to get together with other people and help.
Yeah. I'm completely with you. I love being another optimist in the space as well because I think I see it so much opportunity, and I agree with that. Which is there is something within our culture where people have a propensity to give and they want to give. And here's the little secret that a lot of people don't know who haven't given. There is something internally beautiful that happens when you give towards a cause that you care about.
Sure.
If you give money, if you give time, there is something that happens internally where we also benefit as the giver as well in that scenario. And I think right now, what I'm really working on is how do fundraisers with the advent of AI meet donors where they're at or find new donors who want to be part of their cause. So that's one thing I've been thinking about. The second piece is how do we tap into the next generations of giving? Because the ways in which they give are much different than the ways that we've historically received funding, right? And so I'm curious on both of those fronts if you have any thoughts that you would like to share, particularly on how we're going to engage and keep what's happening in our, in our society going with future generations. How do we inspire philanthropy and giving back? And how do we ultimately inspire these people to come work into nonprofits as well and look at that as a viable career opportunity? So there's three loaded questions, Steve, for you. I'm curious what your take is.
Well, I'll take the younger one first. Because the truth is, I had come to believe in that myth that philanthropy is an age onset behavior, that somehow we have to be patient enough and wait for people to turn 50 or 60 years old to give their first gift, because that's when the children that they might be raising are out of the household, or maybe they're caring for aging parents that can be quite expensive, or that there's something in their own financial earning that makes them not want to donate until they turn 50 or 60. And this summer, GoFundMe, along with Giving Tuesday, commissioned a study, and we shared the results a few months ago that were really exciting in finding that Gen Z actually was more likely to report having given to nonprofits in the past week. When we heard that 71% of Gen Z, so age 14 to 29,
Hmm.
had done something in the last week to support a nonprofit, it surprised a lot of people. But when you dig into that
Hmm.
information, what it actually asks us to do is have a broader definition of what it means to support a nonprofit than simply making a single gift, right?
Okay. Yep.
Um, if you if you fundraise, if you share someone else's fundraiser, if you offer a supportive message and say, "Keep going. This is great. I believe in this." Those are all like ways of organizing and amplifying support. And truthfully, when people do that, they actually reported they were more likely to then give a donation themselves. Unfortunately, the nonprofit space doesn't have often the technology or the time to measure that broader definition of what support looks like beyond being a donor, or a specific, right, financial donor. And if we can build the systems that show how to sort of measure that level of engagement. What do they say? What gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets done. So I believe it's a reporting limitation that has stopped us from really recognizing and growing engagement from younger people.
When you said that, that number struck me. I think I read that article that you guys pushed out, but 71%. I don't know if I could go around to any of my nonprofit leadership right now and ask them, and I don't think they would even come close to that number in terms of what they think the
Correct.
giving is for that. So, as part of this Tide Talk, we'll
Correct.
include that report so that some of the people who want to dive into your guys' report can see some of those insights. Man, that gives us more reason to be optimistic if 71% are willing
Yeah.
to give
And
and engage.
not only that, Josh, that when you compare it to other Americans, those aged 29 or higher, it was lower. It was only 65%. And
Wow.
so the fact that younger Americans are self reporting that they're more likely to be engaged in supporting surprised a lot of folks, but it's actually a challenge for us to get better in how we measure.
Yeah. And then that kind of goes into my second question, which is meeting donors where they're at. So our old, historical ways of going
Yeah.
about to our ideal profile of a donor has been that's still there, but we almost have to go through segmentation by age range. And then I start to think about, and you're probably in front of this, Steve, so I'd love to get your thoughts is where do they access the information? How do you meet them at Gen Z probably is on a cell phone during certain times of the day. I think about the 29 and up group that you talked about, likely early parents. So they may be consuming on their computer or a phone at certain times of day. Help us, like, what's your vision of how we're going to meet donors where they're at from a technology standpoint so that we can start to create that opportunity to give?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, look, all of those behaviors I just outlined for 14 to 29-year-olds, I can date myself a little bit and say when I was 29 years old, the iPhone hadn't been released. Internet was still in its relatively early days. I did all of those things, but I did them offline. I hung up signs in my dorm hallway. I passed out flyers on the quad. I helped organize folks to show them where they could get more involved and volunteer. I just wasn't doing it online. I've got three kids in the house now, 15, 13, and 6. And they do a lot online. A lot of their social relationships, a lot of their gathering is
Hmm.
happening online. And so part of the trick for nonprofit fundraisers today is to understand those behaviors aren't new. Where they're happening is new.
Mm,
And it's increasingly happening in a digital world. And a lot of the leadership in nonprofit fundraising is not 29 or younger, right? They tend to be older as the result of career progression. And so, now that I've had the chance to come work at GoFundMe and understand how the digital ecosystem uh, can really encourage people to go from that first introduction of just trying to learn more to maybe sharing to reaching out and asking others to care as well, and then to create their own fundraiser, all while they make substantially less than anyone else, right? Traditionally, less paid, having
hmm.
less access to disposable wealth. I can see how you can borrow those same best practices and take it into a digital world.
I think that was so brilliant what you said, which is the behavior is not new, but the where is. And that's the ultimate
Yeah.
question that we need to answer for fundraisers is the where and how to reach them in a way that resonates as well.
Right. Yeah, we probably went through an era as fundraisers where we interpreted it just as email, saying to someone, we're going to blast out an email to a large group of people and we're going to ask you if you agree with it to forward it on to other people or maybe click a link and go back and sign a petition in some ways. And then social media certainly had its own opportunity to help organize and bring people together. Now I think we're out entering even a new frontier where communities of people are gathering together and showing that what they care about is part of their identity, and expressing to their friends and their family what causes matter to them and who they support is not that far off to my older brothers used to put bumper stickers on the back of the first cars that they got to show their friends what they supported and what they cared about. Well, my kids don't have cars, right? But they show what they care about in the same way just by creating these communities of shared interests online.
That's brilliant. And look, I want to get into your time at St. Jude's, but one of the things I was most excited about was within your role at GoFundMe, your access to seeing the sector probably from a data perspective is, there's not many people sitting in your seat who have that level of insights. And so you brought up something before, which is a lot of nonprofits are struggling, but it's from a reporting limitation perspective. If you can, now that you've been in seat for a while now, I'm curious, what are you seeing now that you can look broadly across the sector from a fundraising standpoint? You have these reporting limitations that have kind of been known for a long time. Could you maybe sprinkle a little bit for some of us, like what are you seeing? What are some of the leading activities that are happening on some of the more forward-looking successful fundraising teams? I think just given what you're able to see, I would love to pull out some of that from your brain.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for that. Like I have told my friends, I've nonprofit fundraising is the only job I've ever had. From that first job of canvassing, I've spent the last 30 some odd years in the nonprofit fundraising space. But I've also, that means I've actually only worked for 6 nonprofits. So I've had some remarkably long tenures, 7 years at the ASPCA, 13 years at St. Jude, even, slightly shorter stints at a few others, but 6 nonprofits. So I knew 6 nonprofits, and I had friends that worked at other organizations, but I didn't have the real sort of access and knowledge to see the data. Now I get to talk to 6 nonprofits a day. And especially since I've only been here for a few months, the listening tour to some existing customers or prospects, or maybe people who aren't customers anymore, asking them what's working, what's not working, what are they seeing in their own data for it. And so you are right. I've gotten a much broader view into patterns and trends. And we talked a few minutes ago about pattern recognition, right? Of seeing things that are happening across multiple places. To answer your question specifically, though, something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about is how lonely and isolating the act of being solicited for a gift and making that gift can be at times. And for an industry, a sector that talks so much about meeting donors where they are, or being audience first, or being donor centric, um, there's something about the isolation that when you receive a piece of direct mail, or when you receive an email, or you go to a website and make a gift, you assume other people are having the same experience. You assume that others are making gifts. But if we're really honest, you don't actually know
Hmm.
if you're doing it by yourself. I, I went on vacation last week. When I was trying to reserve the hotel room online, the travel site that I was on told me more about the community of people looking for a hotel room than I have ever seen in the nonprofit space. I knew how many people were looking at that same hotel, how many people had considered purchasing it, how many reservations had been made in the last 24 hours or the last 7 days. And so I have to admit, some of my purchase consideration was influenced by just seeing a small number of how many other people had
Hmm.
visited that price in the last day. Consumers who are online, once they see some sort of functionality and technology on one website, I think it becomes their expectation across all websites.
Yep.
And I'm not sure nonprofits have had the ability to think about how to bring that same sense of community into the donation process itself.
Mm. There's a lot to unpack there. Because I do agree. The one thing that I hear from most nonprofits I speak with is that we are held to the Amazon experience of user. That's what it should feel like. It should be able to get 3 clicks. I need to get what I can get in and out. So I agree. The expectations are higher than ever, but the systems are not necessarily equipped to match that experience level today. Is that a fair statement from your
I
perspective?
think I think that's an absolute fair. Now, look, there are some green shoots. There are
True.
some places
True.
across the nonprofit space, and truthfully, I'm really proud. One of the reasons I joined GoFundMe was looking at what they're studying, what they're trying to understand. I'll give you an example. If you've ever gotten a peer-to-peer solicitation for a friend who was doing a marathon or a walk, you've probably seen some version of an activity feed that tells you that John S. gave $25 yesterday, or Jane Doe gave $50 last night. And so I think that activity feed is a start of
Okay.
being able to show the feedback loop, to understand you aren't in this alone. There are others who care. There are others who are doing the same thing. It's a next step to connect them, finding shared content and shared ways of engagement that say, yes, we've all given, but we also all are now invested in the outcome of how much money gets raised, where it gets spent, and whether or not we've made impact on the problem we're trying to solve together.
Hmm. What I'm taking away from what you're saying is there's a couple of things to think about. Uh, it's almost a little bit like the gamification of the fundraising experience, while also what I wrote down in my notes is I put community as the core kind of piece, and then fundraising wraps around that to create that community. And Steve, I've never really thought about, I think fundamentally, obviously we know if you're a nonprofit land, you're always trying to create a sense of community and bridge people. But I've never thought about community with fundraising wrapped around that and kind of intertwining that across the entire donor or giving process. Because I agree, oftentimes when I've given to organizations who don't have a lot of that information, it is just a confirmation email, taxable receipt, and I'm kind of hoping that everything works out versus finding other people who have that like cause that can create a new connection and another community. So it's very interesting the way that you've positioned that. Definitely got my brain going on. It's not just the user experience, the Amazon like experience. There's a whole nother layer of connected tissue in that giving process that we need to unlock in this sector.
I think you're right. And it's funny you say that. We actually call it community fundraising, and we've been struggling to figure out, is that the right name for it? And we can't think of something better. I think it's an umbrella over traditional forms of peer to peer, but also the new kinds of fundraising that are happening with influencers today, and things that are happening not just in physical communities, but communities of people who share the same interests. And if we can go beyond just connecting the fundraiser to the people who they want to ask for support, but connecting the people who give with each other, who
Yes.
maybe didn't know each other before, then we make the world a smaller place and a more
Yep.
interconnected place. No one has really uncracked or has unlocked that part of the puzzle yet. But
Yeah.
those who are going to be able to figure out, how can I get donors who don't know each other to understand that they have shared interests, are going to accelerate their financial performance, but really, they're going to make the world a better place to live in.
Mm. It's hard to say it more beautifully than that, Steve. I think that's pretty incredible, and I really like your thought because I've found that we're at a real unique time where historically systems have held back nonprofits, but I think technology is no longer the barrier to where nonprofits want to get to. I think there's a lot of new advent of technology that can really take them to the next level, but there's a bit of a shift in that change. It's not about just, hey, I'm going to deprecate one technology and I'm going to replace it with another. I'd love for your thoughts on, because you've probably been a part of this multiple times in your experience when you're looking at what your underlying tech stack is to achieve your mission. And so I'm curious, Steve, when you're thinking about just ducktailing on data, reporting limitations, for nonprofits out there who are thinking, hey, I need to be looking at some new systems, agentic capabilities, things are going to put me on more of the leading edge of technology rather than feeling like we're being held back by it, which is more the status quo in most of the conversations I have. What do you think about if an executive director or a leader at a nonprofit is looking at my underlying technology is holding my fundraising or my development teams back? What types of evaluation criteria would you lend to them as they think about becoming who they want to
Question.
be in the future?
It's a great question. I can give you a lot of what not to do's. How about that?
Let's
But that
start
would,
there. That's
but
great. I love it.
that would probably take the rest of our day, not just the time we have. Let me start by answering this way. Unfortunately, too often I've seen development teams blame a piece of technology that they currently have and say, if only we had a new CRM, if only we had a new email tool, if only we had. And And I think what that sometimes does is it takes the responsibility off of answering the question, what are you trying to solve for? What is the problem you're trying to fix? And so you can buy a new piece of technology with lots of promises. It's super important for development staff to be able to articulate where they currently feel they're missing their own expectations, their own promise to their supporters. And the more they can articulate what they're trying to do that they are limited and blocked in being able to do, or where they've been forced to duct tape or use, barbed wire to link something together that shouldn't have been. It puts them already in a stronger position than someone who is chasing the new solution without having a real good understanding of what the problem is that they're trying to um, to
Yeah, the what.
to fix. Yes, I think the best buyers are also those who have the clearest ability to articulate their current systems and processes. Um, there are certainly tools that you can buy that will be useless if you are unable to say, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's why I need to be able to do it. And this is what I expect to see if I'm successful in being able to do it. And so for our team, one of the first things that they do in sort of meeting or understanding a new nonprofit fundraiser is to ask those kinds of discovery questions to really get at the heart of what are you struggling with. And when someone says, I'm able to drive a lot of traffic to my website, but once it gets there, I don't think it's converting at the highest possible gift, or I'm not getting enough monthly donors, or I'm not getting, the volume of new supporters that I would want. Now we're getting somewhere. And now we're layering in a technology solution to solve a specific problem. That's how I think it's really important to begin those conversations.
Oh my gosh. From the conversations I have, I wish you would have been in the room. Because I think a lot of times what happens is we get so frustrated with a current CRM or current piece of technology, and then we start to blame it, to your point. Instead, and then what happens that I see often is that when we are evaluating a new CRM, whatever it may be,
Yeah,
we tend to bring these legacy constraints or ways of thinking from our old system into our new system instead of looking at it as a new opportunity, to your point, to say, where is
that's
our
right.
funnel breaking down? Where's our funnel or conversion breaking down? And let's make sure this new system is addressing those pieces. And then I think
That's
there's
right.
another one, which is to your earlier point from earlier in our discussion, the data visualization piece for your fundraisers so that you are also creating an avenue of continuous growth and learning is probably another piece alongside the technology. The technology, again, I continue to say this, the technology is not really the challenge in the space anymore. It's process, adoption. That's obviously a pretty big one, I think. And then ultimately, is it driving towards your what? And one thing I like to talk about is return on mission. So obviously, there's a return on
Mm,
investment for your dollars, but how are new systems or investments ultimately driving a certain percentage uplift on our return on mission? And that's one thing I hope that nonprofiters can think about as they go into the
interesting.
future, which is, let's take the investment mindset and that strategy from the commercial space and bring that over into the nonprofit space and start to look at return on our donor dollars and return on our mission. And I think those are two different ways of thinking about technology that could dramatically change the sector as a whole.
That is very well put. And I think, you're right. Not many people approach it from that perspective, but those who do have a really strong advantage. Now, I also want to say though, the technology does matter. And there is some bad product that has not either had the thoughtfulness, it hasn't been battle tested. You can tell it wasn't designed by users or with the user in mind. And perhaps the most important part, we're not when we talk about digital fundraising, it's not a mousetrap. It's not something that was invented with a patent 100 and some odd years ago and hasn't had a better design since. When you pick a technology, it's just as important to understand the roadmap of where it's going, because you're not necessarily buying for what you need today. You're buying for what you need a year or 2 years from now. And so I like to consider, you're really selecting a growth partner. Who do you want to be with you as the world continues to change? Because those innovations continue to come quickly. Your problems will stay the same. Well, hopefully not always the same problems, right? But once you articulate the problem, the way that you go about solving for it needs to keep pace with consumer expectations. And so the roadmap of future innovation is almost as important, if not more important, than what you're actually going to do with it tomorrow.
I'll double down on this point, Steve, to tell you that look, with the advent of AI, we have not a lot of nonprofits saying, "Well, why don't I just build this technology myself?" And I say, "You can certainly do that. Do you want to maintain the product? What happens when it goes down in the middle of a major giving
Yeah,
campaign? Like, there's so many pieces." And you also brought a big because we have some other organizations who have kind of popped up and now they have an AI fundraising campaign or they have an AI CRM, and nonprofits are thinking
right.
like, hey, should we be looking at these options? They're priced really cheaply. Like, there's a lot of things that sound really good. But to your point, Steve, if you're going to invest in technology, it better be a robust technology that has a multi-year roadmap,
Yeah,
because I think nonprofits are in danger right now of what I would say is um, small organizations looking to capitalize on the ability to inject their own product offerings that may not have the longevity and the stability that nonprofits need. Because nothing's worse, and this comes back when I was a customer, even though it wasn't on the nonprofit side, when those systems break down at 2 a.m. and they're calling, and internal people are calling you because they're trying to get things done and things are breaking down. Like, you don't want that life. So I will also double down, Steve, that it's so important that who you partner with is a future partner. I love the way that you talked about that. It's like they're going to go alongside this journey with you, but nonprofits definitely need to be a bit more conservative when looking at new technologies coming into our landscape that haven't been proven, aren't necessarily sustainable, or are moving with where the sector's going. I think there's a lot of risk right now in jumping onto some of what I would consider like more smaller point solutions that have just come up because it's easy to spin up an
yeah.
application on Claude.
I think that's really well put. Let me go a step further. I remember listening to an interview with one of the car manufacturing CEOs a few years ago, and the CEO was saying that they learned at this car company they weren't going to be good enough to understand how to build a dashboard display unit that kept pace with the times, because they're not in that business. And so what they learned is make really good speakers and make a screen that plugs into some other outside technology, because your phone is going to be replaced every 2 years, but your car hopefully will last for 6, 8, 10 years. And so they had the forward thinking to understand that they needed to be a delivery shell, and the things inside of it, there were better people designed for it, anticipating and forming for the future. You talk about AI. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the best use of AI was just generative AI, right? I want it to
Right.
write me a silly poem in the style of Edgar Allan Poe that tells jokes, right, or something like that, and it could spit it out in a few moments, or maybe some photos or videos. But I don't really think the technology is all that great for imagery yet. What we're seeing it do, though, is in leaps and bounds. GoFundMe started by saying, let's introduce an intelligent ask array so that we can use all of the history and experience on the consumer side of our business, the hundreds of millions of engagements that have taken place there, to anticipate what's the right amount to ask someone that comes to your website for. For one person, it might be 10, 20, 30, 50. For the next person, it might be 50, 75, 100, 200. And there are signals that you can pick up on using artificial intelligence to determine what's the right intelligent ask array to put in front of someone. And you're going even a step further to say, how can you use AI to help coach fundraisers to write their profile on the page? And then how can you design moments to remind them of when is the best time to send a reminder and to create the activity? So the applications of AI itself are changing, just like the underlying technology of AI is getting smarter and faster every day and every month. How it's used is shifting as nonprofits are able to say, this is the current problem that I have now, to the point we just talked about. How can I find a solution that comes in for that problem?
Yes. Oh man, so many thoughts from that point, Steve, which is, I guess one thing I want to ask, if you're back in your customer seat days, what does step one and two look like as you're thinking about the agentic revolution? Is it, hey, we need to have an AI policy, or hey, I need to go start speaking with some of the forward-looking organizations like GoFundMe or other, other ones that they might find as trusted advisor groups and start to understand the art of what's possible out there? If you put your customer hat back on, what are your first two actions you're taking for a nonprofit
Yeah.
who maybe has no AI footprint today?
Well, steps one and two. Hmm. Honestly, you have to just get people for step one has to be getting people comfortable in using it. I'm so afraid of people who have not yet ever logged on to an AI website or application and are afraid to say it. I think they're out there. I think it might be more frequent than we're aware. And I think the divide between those who have a comfort and those who missed that day in school and don't remember like what we're talking about. It happens in a nonprofit. There are people who don't have a login to the CRM and are ashamed to say it because they feel like admitting that is going to ask the question, what have you been doing for the last few weeks? That might feel silly, but getting people to get comfortable logging in, experimenting, uh, you will begin to let flowers bloom at their own pace. People might begin to understand in a way that's appropriate and safe for the internal legal team and IT team, not to share proprietary secrets. But if you can have an enterprise AI connection with your email or your shared file, or you can, exchange notes on best practices, and two people have a deck and you can merge them together and find the best, those things start to multiply quickly. But the second step, I think, has nothing to do with AI itself. It gets back to listing problems. What decisions did you make last week using your own intelligence? And when you get people to focus on that exercise, the AI work takes care of itself. I'll give you a
Yes.
perfect example of this. When I was speaking recently with a group of fundraisers who organize a national walk series.
Hmm.
So they ask people to show up at 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday, pass out, bananas and water bottles and walk. When they did that exercise, what they said was, we made the decision on where to host the walk. And so organizations do this all the time. But how do you know if the high school track or the zoo or the park on the edge of town or cordoning off streets downtown, like, how do you know what the right site selection is? It requires human intelligence, experience, intuition, and some really hard to define things, but there is an objective decision making criteria, whether they're aware of it or not. That's an amazing AI use case to go back and say, here are the criteria of how we
Hmm.
select our walk location. And for the last several years, we've been deciding it as this place because we get a good deal, or there's parking available, or we think families with young children will want to come. Imagine if you were able to outline all the decisions you were making as an organization and relying on manual intelligence or status quo decision making to do it. Now you're directing smart technology towards decisions that you were already doing. So I would actually argue that the second most important step has nothing to do with AI itself.
Oh my gosh, that was brilliant. I'm just going to go in straight into a prompt if any fundraisers listening to this and they want to use, Steve, what you just said, which would be what I would do is I would put in what you just talked about, our location, what we've done historically, what we've done each year, our general population numbers, where we're projecting to do it in 2026. And I would prompt my AI to say, challenge us to look at different options where there's more foot traffic or better opportunities. Ask me any questions to make sure that you can fully understand everything from our human decision element, and then present me with the three best options in a business case that would drive why we should look at alternative options.
Great prompt. That's a great prompt. Last month, I was having a really hard time making a decision that I won't get into now. It's almost irrelevant. And my CEO saw that I was struggling with it and knew that there were two other members of the C suite who were stakeholders in this decision. He had recommended, I won't mention the name, but one of the chat programs has a verbal audio button that we could press. He said, get the three of you in a room, talk it out, and do it while it's being listened to, and then ask AI, what questions are we failing to ask each other that will help us better reach a consensus? Because we spoke for 45 minutes and we were talking in circles, and we had been having the same circular conversation for weeks. And so we needed an outside, in this case, artificial intelligence ear to listen to the conversation. And when we said, what questions would you ask us to further clarify the decision points, we were all stunned at what questions it forced us to answer. We answered those questions, and then we had it help frame a decision making framework for us that I don't know, I could even say it saved us time. We never would have gotten to that framework without the outside assistance.
Wow. That is a powerful example, Steve. I think
Yeah.
any nonprofit could take away that
Yeah.
immediately right now today and say, if we have a similar problem, get the people in the room, let's talk it out, and let's use the AI to just challenge us with a different, unique perspective.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yes.
It is wild where our world is going and that
That
technology is there, that even
isn't that the
someone
truth?
like with your experience, that you can still find that there are ways that you can use AI to continuously grow your go to market, your fundraising brain, all of those things. I mean, that shows the power of what these tools can do, that even, a C-suite as powerful of yours is still looking to augment and get diversity of thought. I mean, it's incredible.
I've never worked at a company like here at GoFundMe where the talent you're surrounded with is so dense, right? I didn't even know the phrase talent density until 6 months ago, believe it or not. I will tell you, AI has not, it's not a supplement to the smarter the group of people you assemble, the more helpful AI can be because you're actually even better at bringing your own intellectual curiosity to frame the problem, and if you can help frame that problem, as we talked about earlier, you can actually then accelerate the solution even faster.
Brilliant, Steve. One of the things I want to do, I think it's incredible to kind of lean on this. I do want to jump back into your journey a little bit, if you don't mind, if I'm going to ask a few
Sure.
questions just on how you got
Yeah,
to
of course.
GoFundMe. I think one of the things that really stood out, I'm a big dog lover. My family and I, we rescue dogs from laboratories in China as well, and then rehome them into different places. Dogs who have never seen grass before on their toes, that kind of thing. We're big beagle fans. They're tested on quite
Awesome.
dramatically. How did you
Yes.
get to the ASPCA? What led you to that journey? I'd love to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I was working at, so I got a job. I'll have to go back just for a quick second before, because after I graduated, I was hired as an administrative assistant. It was a humbling experience. I spent several months writing letters to lawyers who were representing donors who had passed away and left us in their will. And so my job all day long was to write letters to lawyers saying, please be advised, we received your letter on this date and we are responding with this letter on this date. And mind numbing type of work. I literally got a tap on the shoulder who from someone who knew I had door to door canvassing experience, asked if I wanted to travel the world, go to 18 countries, and see how how street canvassing was being used for monthly donor acquisition across the world, and bring it to the United States. This was back in 2000 and early 2001, and that was a lucky experience, right place at the right time, to go from being an admin assistant to being trusted to figure out how to use door to door canvassing experience and bring street canvassing here to the United States. During that process, I met a mentor of mine named Todd who worked at an outside agency. We kept in touch. I eventually moved on. I went to work for a domestic violence shelter. I was at a historical society in Brooklyn. And I got a phone call from Todd saying, I created a new position for a data analyst, and I want you to come to the ASPCA and help us out. So he didn't really have a job description. He didn't have an office, but they found a closet somewhere for me to put a laptop in. No joke, a literal closet. And so that was 2005. And you talk about the right place at the right time. I had the privilege of just looking at other people's work through the same lens that I did when I was talking to canvassers on the hood of a van in Bethesda, Maryland, and uh, realized that sometimes the longest held beliefs that we had were incorrect if you turned it just sideways and saw it through a different lens. And we began to shift our investment decisions. Well, the ASPCA in 2005 to 2009 was one of those special places where we captured lightning in a bottle. Pets were becoming part of the American family. People were not yet impacted by the Great Recession in a way that ultimately accelerated the ASPCA. I can tell you about in a moment. So the public zeitgeist was there to care about pets. We also had Hurricane Katrina that required us to think differently about shelter relocation. Michael Vick's dog fighting raid had happened back then, and the dogs were not euthanized on the spot. They were actually retrained and brought in by the ASPCA to learn about how even dogs that had been in those violent situations did not have to be euthanized immediately, and there was some hope for them. You had a pet food safety recall coming from some pet foods that were made in China that were literally killing some pets. And so all of those things put the ASPCA in a really strong position to connect with supporters. And then we had that Sarah McLaughlin TV spot that I was lucky enough to be on a team with. And as I mentioned, the recession hits. TV time became free almost overnight. And so if you were watching television back in 2008 or 2009, chances are you saw that Sarah McLaughlin spot.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar. I've seen it many, many times, and it just goes straight to the heart every time, right?
Yes. So that was how I got there. And I stayed there, like I said, for about 7.5, almost 8 years before moving to Memphis and working with St. Jude.
Just incredible stuff. And I think when you find like you said, it was a lightning in a bottle moment, right? Where the, just so many things were happening to electrify that organization and give you guys the
Yeah.
opportunity to further the mission in a way probably that historically maybe they didn't see as an opportunity until all of these kind of puzzle pieces or dominoes started
Yeah.
falling.
Well, in that, like, in that in order to be successful, you do need a healthy dose of preparation, planning, strategic thinking, and luck. Right? There are some things that if that hadn't happened externally, or if this person hadn't joined the team, lightning in a bottle is the only phrase I can use because I'm not sure it was replicable. And so that's not to say the only way to be successful is to wait for luck to hit. You can create your own, but I think it's important that we acknowledge there are factors both internally and externally that create the perfect scenario for some organizations.
Yeah, no doubt. I think where we're at today is almost like a new level playing field that gives a lot of nonprofits the ability to. One thing I want to double down on, some of the most forward thinking and successful nonprofits are ones that I see invest in data resources, just like the ASPCA. They may have put you in a closet, but they made a job for a data
Yeah.
resource. And when I see nonprofits invest in that skill set, it changes. It can be a trajectory changer for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And this was 2005.
That's what I
So
mean. Like, yeah.
20 some odd years ago, when the idea was, can I get a better return on paying this kid, however, when I was probably making less than 70, 60, something like that at the
Yeah.
time. And so, yeah, I think the expense was not insignificant, but it was compared against other places where that same money would be spent. And the return on investment, the return on mission was probably even bigger back then.
So you hit lightning in a bottle. Man, I just love that phrase. The lightning in the bottle with the ASPCA. What
Yes.
led you to start to look at new opportunities and, kind of help us understand that move to St. Jude?
It was the summer of 2012. I got a phone call from a headhunter, and he said, "Are you willing to consider an opportunity in the middle of the country?" Um, to be honest, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and ALSAC, the fundraising and awareness organization, was already the biggest in the country. They weren't a turnaround story. They had been capturing lightning in a bottle for 55 years before I got that phone call. I took the interview because I said to the CEO, actually, I was trying to get my hands on the strategic plan so I could figure out what they were doing well and bring it back to New York and use it at the ASPCA. And then I got a tour, and I was toured around the hospital by a former patient who was now married with kids of her own. And she described how lucky she felt to be alive. Um, and once I heard that story, I remember going into a medicine room and seeing a dad that was younger than me who was sleeping on one of the couches. And I just knew I had to come home and sell the house and pull my kids out of school and convince my wife to move to Memphis, because once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And I knew that I had a very particular type of skill and training, and it's what they needed. And so I dropped everything to move to Memphis.
Wow. Wow, what a story. I'd like to jump into that a little bit because one of the things that we talk about in these career journeys are, they're never as easy or as clean as they look like on LinkedIn. And Steve, that is, I mean, you uprooted your life. You changed your entire neighborhood, your friendship group to go chase creating impact on a level maybe that, few of us will see in our lives. Could you help maybe illuminate where you feel comfortable and how you had that conversation with your family and how the
Mm.
drive to fulfill the mission, led to you having to uproot and go into an uncomfortable space within your own personal life to be able to chase this dream? Could you maybe just illuminate what that was like for you?
I can, but I'll actually pick a different experience where that conversation was harder because honestly, it's like the parable of the Good Samaritan, and not to use too much of a biblical reference for my own career journey, but you know, the others that passed by, if you know that story, a person on the side of the road needing help, there were many people that passed by, many. Um, and they said, well, what will happen to me if I stop? And the Good Samaritan, for me, the point of the story is that individual said, what will happen to them if I don't? And so honestly, like that's what I didn't have a choice. And I think my family understood that. And quite frankly, it was the biggest game in town, right? The biggest job opportunity in the country. And so we did it. But while I was there were two times that I chose to take a demotion or a lateral move, one that removed me from being a people leader. I went from being, and it's hard to see this exactly. People, right? LinkedIn won't tell you the exact full story, but the truth is, I had been promoted to Deputy Chief Development Officer, a job that I was so honored to be in. I was working for another mentor, Sue Harpool, in my career, who just taught me so much um, about how to be a better person and a better fundraiser. And when I decided I had to move back to New York for some family reasons, um, I had to choose to leave that position and become an individual contributor with no team, no budget, kind of going back and sitting in the closet again with a laptop, thinking about how to help have an impact on financial analytics. Um, and it was a hit to my ego. It was a hit to my sense of self worth. It was a harder decision. It was a substantial pay cut. Um, but the organization needed it, and I wanted to continue working there, even though I was no longer going to be there in person. And this was pre pandemic. So a remote opportunity just wasn't available. Um, but I accepted that because, when people say that careers zig and zag and don't always follow a linear path, we also have to remember that it's not just a lateral move. Sometimes in your career, you need to intentionally take a position that pays less, that has less stature, that will hurt your ego, and trust in that broader purpose. there were things about that position that I wouldn't have been able to learn, um, that later propelled me in my career. And if I would have tried to continue only taking bigger jobs and only taking higher paying jobs, I wouldn't have had the step function later on in my career to end up in the positions that I have.
Incredible, Stephen. Thank you for opening up and being very honest
Yeah.
and open about that because I think um, these career journeys are anything but linear and they are so challenging. And obviously, we put our best page forward on LinkedIn, but man, it's those journeys.
Yeah.
And I think for you to have the self reflection and look, you very clearly are a man of action. And I think one of the things to just see to be able to take that, it's tough. Our egos, man, they get hurt pretty easily in those scenarios. But
That's
I think
right.
one thing you said there, Steve, I just want everyone to hear, which is it put you had to not only take this job, but you had to train your brain and your mindset to go all in on this to get out of it things that you maybe you weren't going to get out of it if you went in with a pessimistic or a woe is me type of attitude. How did you get there? So how did you go from the moment where it's like, man, this is not what I was hoping for, this is not the vision that I had for myself, what did you do internally with your own mind to develop that muscle to say, I'm going to make the best of this situation? Obviously, you're bought into the mission. All of those
Yeah.
things are the assumption. But how did you make the most of a situation where most people would have said, I'm out of here or I'm much big, I'm bigger than this? Like, help us understand that
Yeah.
version of you.
Look, I'll be even more vulnerable on this because I remember the exact moment, and you say it as if I knew it all at the time, and I didn't. And it was a process, and it was a journey. Um, I used to go to, dinner party events or family reunions, and people would ask the question, "What do you do?" I had the wrong impression that what they were asking was, "What's your job title and what organization do you work for?" And I loved that answer, right? Because I could say I was Deputy Chief Development Officer at ALSAC St. Jude, the largest nonprofit fundraising organization in the country. Um, but that was my own interpretation of the question. So I was asked one day after I'd taken that demotion, and now I had some convoluted title that was made up, right? I didn't have a team, and I was asked the same question, and I answered based on the title, and it didn't feel right. It didn't describe who I thought I was, and I had that disconnect where now giving my job title didn't convey my own sense of identity. And there's probably people listening to this who have been in the same situation where the words that come out of their mouth don't connect. It's not their bumper sticker anymore. And so instead, I made a commitment right then to answer in terms of what I spend my time trying to figure out. And so if you'd ask me today, Steve, what do you do? I wouldn't necessarily introduce myself as the chief customer growth officer at GoFundMe. I would introduce myself more by saying I spend my time trying to think how I can help nonprofits increase their digital fundraising, or how I can be a better growth partner to nonprofit fundraisers across the country. That might sound like a dodge. It might sound a little bit glib, but it rewires your brain to describe yourself to yourself based on what you're trying to figure out, what you're trying to achieve, rather than what's on your business card, if they still make those, or what's on your LinkedIn profile. That's what did it for me, and it has stuck for several years now.
Mm. That's incredible. And look, I wrote down, it was like a reframing, but you are so, and I'm speaking to our audience today, you are so much more than your title or the titles you've had in your career. You're a human who has been through immense experience and has so much to offer to the world. So I like
Yes.
what you said, Steve, on just if you are going through this scenario that Steve has lived and you are finding yourself in a similar one, it's a reframe around who you are. And one mentor taught me this a long time ago, which is, you are not a lottery ticket. You don't have this moment where you have to cash in on your value. You are growing every day that you learn and you grow as a human being. Your value grows regardless of what title you have or what company you work for. And so I think both of us are reiterating the same point, which is as much as you can hear this right now, and I know it doesn't always resonate, don't allow your title to influence your sense of self worth and your sense of value. And if you are looking at a demotion, as Steve has gone to, why don't you reframe it around what you do, not how you describe your role on a hierarchy, but like, what do you do and what are you trying to achieve? And that reframe, Steve, as you talked about, seems like that was that moment where it was like, I'm more than my title.
Plus 1,000 to that. And look, it's natural for high achievers to have a moment of, grieving and private vulnerability and understanding that they wish that wasn't the case. I'm sure there's many people who aren't just starting out young in their career, they're more mature and advanced in their career, but they don't feel that the title and the level that they have now is as
Yes.
impressive as one that they had 2 or 3 jobs ago. And you can sense it when you have those kinds of conversations. But it's okay to have that also conversation with yourself that you believe you're capable of more. And to recognize, as you just so beautifully said, you're more than what your title says. You are a human with lived experience who every day has an opportunity to explore those same challenges with more experience and hopefully more practice. Going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, it's like door to door canvassing. Every day, you actually get a new chance of being able to solve the problems you were working on yesterday.
Mm. Thank you, Steve, for wrapping that up and so eloquently put as well. Look, with remaining time that we have, there's been a theme throughout this that we've talked about in your career where, for better, for worse, for luck, as sometimes we talk about, you have landed at some organizations where it feels like lightning in a bottle, right? I think we've talked about those different opportunities. Tell me about the lightning in the bottle at GoFundMe right now, because I think that you guys are sitting on some very exciting stuff. And I feel like you've got to be having those same feelings with where you guys are at today. So, as much as you can, tell us a little bit about the lightning in the bottle you're experiencing right now.
So I'm going to build up to it in a moment by just saying, one of my favorite quotes comes from The Office. Andy Bernard says it in one of the last episodes. He says, it's here on my desk, I wish there was a way to know that you're in the good old days before you've actually left them. And so he was being reflective, right, on the multiple years at Dunder Mifflin. I've been fortunate enough in my career several times to actually know it, to know that you're living in the good old days. And this is one of those moments right now at GoFundMe. People, process, tools. That's the secret, right? You start with the people. I joined the organization because of the way that the CEO described the opportunity, but I'd been fortunate enough to know some of the account executives, some members of the customer growth team for years, and had admired them. And so to be colleague, and as I'd said, in such a talent dense organization. Um, some of the team having been there for 8, 9, 10 years from before the Classy acquisition, and some who had just joined and been recruited onto the team several months ago. So I start there with people. And when you have a bunch of smart people who like each other, who challenge each other, and who push for better answers, that's the first ingredient. Process is second. um, you know, Dysfunction shows up in my experience in workplaces and in jobs, not because of the people, but because there are processes that don't allow them to be focused, where they're reinventing the wheel every day, where they are working at cross purposes, where they don't understand a shared vision. At GoFundMe, our mission is to help people help each other. It's as pure as that. And we are ruthless in our prioritization to understand what will help more people help the most others. And so, with that clarity of purpose, the processes, don't stand in the way of good people doing good things. And then the third one are tools. And I think, I'm really fortunate that I'm joining an organization that has spent years refining some of the tools that are used by individual donors on the consumer side of our platform and have been making donations, I mean, for many years, and the best practices that come out of that. But, the same tools that fundraisers need when they're trying to raise money after a medical emergency on GoFundMe.com are some of the same tools that can and should be used by fundraisers who are on staff at an organization that's trying to pursue its own mission, whether that's to cure cancer or feed the hungry or provide disaster relief or help protect dogs and cats are the most innocent among us. So GoFundMe's been working on those sorts of tools for years, but now the synergy of Classy and GoFundMe together, we call it GoFundMe Pro, is putting the fundraiser as at the center. I loved your language earlier. I believe fundraisers are the hero of the story. And if you can make fundraisers effective, then they will enable more donors to provide more support for more beneficiaries. It's the calling of a lifetime. And the fact that I get to bring those tools and that infectious optimism to more nonprofit fundraisers every day, I wake up really excited every day about it.
Oh, I love that. There's so much to dive into. I would like to shout out a few of your people who I think very highly of, if that's okay. So Aaron obviously
Yeah.
connected us for this. Jessica Lanolin, who's been in the nonprofit space
Yes.
forever, incredible
Yes.
human being. And then somebody very personally on my side, because I worked with your organization, unfortunately, for the Calvin Jake Robinson Foundation. And Jared on your team was one of the most,
Yeah.
like, he just understood and he treated us with such grace at a time when we had just gone through this massive loss and we're trying to figure out how to make the best use of a really large GoFundMe campaign in the absence of my friend who was one of
Yeah.
the surfers murdered down in Mexico. And so I just want to double down that the people is everything to me as well. And every step of the way, GoFundMe always shows up. And when we needed them the most, it was almost like almost like they were an extension of our team and the way that they cared and the way that they spoke to us and the grace of time that they gave us to work through the emotional trials and tribulations. So I just want to shout that out, Steve, because just personally, I have to give credit where credit's due. And I have just been blown away by the types of humans you guys have at your organization.
It's a recurring theme. You just mentioned three of the best. I can assure you there are hundreds more that are equal in their passion and their empathy. Look, someone told me when I first joined, the unfortunate part of GoFundMe is that we meet people sometimes on their hardest day, where they're in a situation they couldn't have possibly fathomed they would ever be in, and they don't have hope and they don't know what to do next. Um, and money doesn't solve all of that, right? In fact, it can be the least important part sometimes of what happens. Don't get me wrong, it is needed in many situations for incredibly essential life-saving things. And when you can when you can match that with a bit of empathy and then provide someone with the community of people who want to help, who want to lift them up, uh, nonprofit fundraising has the ability to change the world, and I think GoFundMe's in a really unique position to help do that.
So well said, Steve. And I agree. And I've been on your guys' platform in multiple different venues. So I will just say that I can double down on the actual experience as well.
I'm sorry
Um,
you had to go through that, and I'm really I look. I noticed that you come out of it now, looking back on it with a sense of admiration and love
I do.
for the people that you met along the way. And I'm sure there were instances and moments as you went through that where you wouldn't have ever imagined that something positive or helpful or beautiful could come out of it. And I think we see that play out thousands of times every week.
Yeah. I'll just go one step further to say, Jared, it almost felt like he created, and I meant to mention this earlier because it's a part of your career, which Jared helped us create a ripple impact. And for me, the ripple effect is something so important. It's not just about what we do
Yeah.
today, but the ripples that we create in our society, and ripples become waves over time. And that's what it felt like, Steve. Your team literally felt like they came in and wrapped their arms around us and created a sense of community when we needed it the most. There was never pressure. There was never that like really strong sales motion. It truly felt like people who came from industry and understood and led with empathy. And that's what created a relationship where, like, if I see Jared on the street, we say hi. We go meet up at events. Like he comes and finds me and says, "What's up?" Like, they come to our community events in San Diego. Like, they are truly ingrained into us. It's not just a transactional relationship. It's been something pretty special, and I can only speak to my own lived experience, but that's what it's been since day one, since I met you guys.
I won't speak for Jared, but I know that many people on the team feel that providing that level of assistance and help, um, we don't say it in the mission statement. We exist to help people help each other. And when you do so, you also help yourself in ways that people don't really understand until they're in the position to help someone else.
Indeed, so well put. Well, look, Steve, it's been incredible to have you on. I think we could probably talk for another 3 hours if
Yeah.
nobody stopped us here. So I'm just curious. I'd love to give you the stage as you think and look towards the future in our spaces, the future of fundraising, and just any thoughts or lessons or principles that you'd like to give out to the world as we wrap up today's podcast.
Yeah, first I'll say because I know you have a lot of people earlier in their career that are listening to this show and shows like it for advice. Um, I'll just quickly end with one that I was given early in my career that has stuck with me is that your job, especially when you're earlier in your career, uh, is to identify, articulate, and advocate for the change you want to be, especially if you're in a larger or maybe an organization that you don't feel as seen. You need to identify how you think you can help. And that is hard. You need to be able to articulate how you can provide that help. And then you need to be able to advocate. And that third one is the one people forget. Because just because you see a big need and just because you know the solution doesn't mean that everyone, especially management or leadership or some other blocker in the way, isn't in a position to hear it. And so advocacy takes sustained intensity. And so I think that's something I would offer. The final thing I'd say is that for nonprofit fundraisers that are listening, this doesn't have to be a zero sum game. If we're going to increase charitable participation in the United States, if we're going to get more people to be generous with their time and with their finances to help move the world towards the future we all want, a rising tide has to lift all boats. We need to increase the overall pie of philanthropy, not fight over market share. Companies like GoFundMe, I think, believe that in their DNA. I certainly know that you do as well, in sort of the work that you bring forward and allowing people to share their stories. Um, Regardless of what mission we may individually work for, nonprofit fundraising is in this together, and it is a sector that is facing similar problems, and therefore we should be able to work on similar solutions together.
So well put. Steve, thank you so much for your time. I mean, I'm going to have to listen back because you've been a wealth of knowledge and just dropped so much on us. So thank you so much for all that you've done for the nonprofit sector and all the change that you have rippled out within your career. And I'm excited to see you keep doing that at GoFundMe.
Well, right back at you. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you for doing what you do and for giving people a platform to get really valuable fundraising advice early in their career.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, y'all. Cheers.
Okay. Bye.